Hi, I'm Chris Matten, a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers in Singapore, here at the RiskMinds conference in Amsterdam 2012. And with me today is Professor Ed Altman, who's been at this conference, I think, for many, many years now. And if I may, Ed, introduce you as not so much the father as the grandfather of credit risk management.
That'll be interesting, yes, you can do that.
So we'll be very interested to hear what it is you're going to be saying to the conference. What are your key messages to the delegates this year?
Well, as usual, I'm very happy to be involved with ICBI and with conferences that your firm has sponsored. Tomorrow I'll be mainly talking, Chris, about sovereign risk, which I think is, in the world of risk today, probably the number one area, and particularly what's going on in Europe. And this is really based on some research recently that we've been doing in the area of sovereign risk, and asking the question first, why is it that we're always surprised with the revelation that countries get into trouble, and surprised in the sense that the markets and the models up to now have not predicted these very well. So for example, in Europe, if you look at the way the markets were looking at Greece and Italy and Spain and Portugal, etc., at the end of 2008, end of 2009 even, the ratings were very high still, the spreads were low, and people weren't that concerned. And the usual analytics for analyzing these countries are kind of like a top-down approach, looking at macroeconomic factors, debt to GDP, deficits to GDP, and various other macro, unemployment, productivity, trade deficits. And while these are useful methods and measures, we have decided that it's not sufficient. And so our theory and contribution is to look at the sovereign risk in a very different, unique way. We are looking from the bottom up rather than the top down. By analyzing the health of the private sector in each of the countries. Particularly the non-financial corporate sector, and then afterwards the financial banking sector. And interestingly, you could have identified, before any of the rating agencies or the macro models, you could have identified which countries in Europe were in trouble. The same way you could have analyzed which countries were in trouble in the Asian crisis in the late 90s. And so tomorrow I'll be talking about our metric, and our metric is based on, you call me the grandfather of credit risk. Well,
I meant that in the nicest possible way.
Well, thank you for that. My wife would be interested to know that she's a grandmother now. But interestingly, the model we're using to evaluate the default risk of companies in the various countries, you might call it the grandson of Z. Because ZScore was developed, as you may know, in the late 1960s. It's now close to 50 years old. This new model we use is to analyze the health of the private sector using a technique called Z-metrics, which is very similar to Z, but it is more powerful, more up-to-date data and like. And basically what we do is we look at the private sector and we aggregate the Z-scores, if you will, of each of the firms, and then look at the median and the 75th percentile, and then rank them by country and compare them with CDS spreads as well as ratings. And I think our evidence is going to be pretty powerful that this technique could be very effective in identifying on an early warning system as well as a continuing system which countries are in trouble. In addition, we can look at what's happening today. And it's very interesting to see that, as you may know, in the last, since July, the last few months, the markets have calmed down in Europe. So the spreads, the CDS spreads are down, the yields on the sovereign debt are down. And my opinion it's only because of the invasion, if you will, or the introduction of direct support from the ECB.
Right. So you think the risk is still there, the underlying
If you look
risk?
at the fundamentals of these economies, they're weaker than ever. They're not stronger, they're weaker. And that's what our data show. And so right now I think the spreads are too low. The yields are too low relative to the fundamental weaknesses of these countries. And there's a good chance that the European currency union is still in jeopardy.
Okay.
And we'll try to explore those possibilities tomorrow.
Time to go short.
Could be.
And presumably this technique also helps with the fact that when you're looking at macro statistics, they're very backward-looking. GDP stats take a long time to prepare.
Exactly.
And then you have countries like Greece where they basically just lied about the numbers, so that makes it even more dangerous.
Exactly. Lied about the numbers. Well, maybe lied is very strong, but anyway, the numbers were much worse than were being reported. That's been across the board in Europe anyway for many, many countries. But if you're interested in this, you also can look at the fact that our measure is much more forward-looking, because we're looking at the probability of default in the future rather than what has happened in the past.
Okay, that sounds very interesting. I look forward very much to your presentation tomorrow.
It'll be my pleasure. And,
Ed, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you very much.